The invitation came 3 weeks late, not because it got lost, because my parents wanted to make sure everyone else said yes first. That's how it's always been with me. I'm the afterthought, the extra chair pulled up only once the table is already set. Still, I went, because it was my brother's engagement, because I told myself this time would be different, because some part of me still hoped they'd finally see me as more than the family punchline. I arrived alone. That alone already put me at a disadvantage. My brother, Daniel, and his fiancée, Claire, had chosen a private dining room at an upscale restaurant overlooking the river. White linens, low lighting, soft music that made conversations feel important even when they weren't. Everyone else arrived in pairs, couples, polished, comfortable. I walked in carrying a single bottle of wine. It wasn't flashy, no gold foil screaming for attention, no heavy wooden box, just a simple, dark bottle wrapped carefully in tissue, placed inside a modest gift bag. My mother spotted me immediately. She always does. Her eyes flicked from my face down to my hands. "That's it?" she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "You brought wine?" I smiled politely. "Yes." My father chuckled from his seat. "Of course she did. Always practical." Practical. That word had followed me my entire life. Daniel came over and hugged me. "I'm glad you made it," he said sincerely. "You didn't have to bring anything." "I wanted to," I replied. Claire smiled warmly. "Wine is perfect." My mother sniffed. "Well, let's hope it's drinkable." I let that pass. I always did. We took our seats. I was placed at the far end of the table, naturally, close enough to be included, far enough to be ignored. The waiter poured champagne. Toasts were made. Laughter floated around the table like something I wasn't quite allowed to touch. Then my father leaned back in his chair, eyeing the gift table. "So," he said loudly, "let's see what everyone brought." Claire protested lightly. "Oh, you don't have to." "Nonsense," my mother said. "It's fun." They started with Daniel's future in-laws. A weekend getaway, designer homeware, an envelope I assumed held cash. Each gift was praised loudly. "Oh, that's lovely. So thoughtful. Very generous." Then my mother's gaze landed on the wine bottle. "Well," she said, lifting it by the neck like it might stain her fingers, "here's this." A few people laughed politely. My father squinted at the label. "I don't recognize it," he said. "Must be one of those grocery store specials." More laughter. My cheeks burned. "It's not," I said calmly. My mother waved her hand. "Sweetheart, it's fine. Not everyone understands wine." The irony nearly made me laugh. Instead, I smiled. "I understand it well enough," I said. My brother shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, Dad—" "Oh, relax," my father interrupted. "We're just teasing. She's always been economical." Economical. Another favorite. My mother turned to Claire. "You'll learn. She likes to appear understated. It's her way of feeling superior." That one hurt, because it wasn't true. I didn't dress simply to feel superior. I didn't choose quiet to feel smarter. I did it because I learned early that standing out made me a target. The waiter reached for the bottle. "Shall I open this one?" he asked. My mother laughed. "If you want to risk it." The waiter hesitated, then uncorked it professionally. As he poured, his posture changed, just slightly. He leaned closer to the glass, swirled, inhaled. Then he paused. "I'm sorry," he said, looking at me. "May I ask where you acquired this?" The table quieted a bit. "It was part of a private collection," I said. My father scoffed. "Oh, don't encourage her." The waiter didn't laugh. Instead, he set the bottle down gently. "Sir," he said carefully, "this particular wine is extremely valuable." Silence crept across the table. My brother looked at me confused. Claire's eyes flicked between us. "How valuable?" someone asked. The waiter hesitated, then said, "Retail value would be approximately $15,000. The room froze. My mother laughed loudly. "Oh, please," she said, "that's not funny." "I'm not joking," the waiter replied. "We actually don't typically serve bottles of this caliber without prior notice." My father stared at the bottle like it had just insulted him. "That's impossible," he said. "She wouldn't—" "She did," I said quietly. Every head turned toward me. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with something steadier. I brought wine. I didn't bring it to impress anyone. I brought it because it meant something. My mother's face flushed. "You expect us to believe you spent that kind of money?" she demanded. "I didn't spend it. I invested years ago." Silence again, the kind that changes things. My brother looked stunned. "You invested?" I nodded. "Wine futures. It was part of my portfolio." My father laughed weakly. "You? Since when do you have a portfolio?" I met his eyes. "Since I stopped telling you about my life." No one spoke. The waiter cleared his throat. "Would you like me to continue pouring, or should I return the bottle to storage?" I looked around the table, at the people who had just mocked me, at the parents who'd never once asked what I actually did, at the brother who suddenly looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Please," I said, "go ahead." Glasses were filled, hands shook. My mother didn't touch hers. My father stared into his like it might accuse him. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. This wasn't about wine. It was about the story they'd told themselves about me for years and how fragile it was once exposed. But if you think that revelation was the most uncomfortable part of the night, you have no idea what happened next. Because the wine wasn't the only thing I'd kept quiet about, and once the truth started pouring, there was no stopping it. The table didn't recover right away. Conversation didn't ease back into place the way it usually did after one of my parents' comments landed a little too hard. This time, the silence lingered, thick and awkward, stretching longer than anyone knew how to manage. My mother finally lifted her glass. She sniffed it once, cautiously, like it might explode. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh, "I suppose there's a first time for everything." She took a sip. Her expression changed instantly. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but enough that everyone noticed. My father watched her face closely, then took a sip himself. He froze, just for a second, then swallowed. "That's good," he said slowly. The understatement made my lips twitch. The waiter hovered nearby, clearly unsure whether to stay or retreat. "Would you like me to decant the rest?" he asked. "Yes," my brother said quickly, eager to move things forward. "Please." As the waiter walked away with the bottle, my mother turned to me. "You could have said something," she said sharply. I raised an eyebrow. "I did. You didn't listen." "That's not what I mean. You didn't have to let us make fools of ourselves." I set my napkin down. "You didn't look foolish," I said calmly. "You looked certain." That stung. My father cleared his throat. "Since when are you involved in investments like that?" I took a sip of water. "Since about 7 years ago," I said. "Right after I left the firm you pushed me into." He frowned. "You left that job?" "Yes." "You never told us." I smiled faintly. "You never asked." That landed harder than the wine valuation. My brother shifted in his seat. "What do you do now?" "I manage assets," I said simply. "Alternative markets mostly." My mother scoffed. "You mean stocks?" "No," I replied. "Wine, art, limited commodities." Claire leaned forward, curious. "That's fascinating." I nodded. "It's quiet work, long term." "Is that why you dress like that?" my mother blurted out. There it was. I glanced down at my simple black dress. No designer logos, no statement jewelry. "Yes," I said. "It helps people underestimate me." A few people laughed. Not at me, with me. That was new. My father frowned. You could have told us you were doing well. I am doing well, I said. I just didn't need you to validate it. The waiter returned with the decanter, pouring carefully. Ma'am, he said softly, this bottle is extraordinary. Your guests are very fortunate. My mother forced a smile. Yes, apparently. Dinner resumed, but the energy had shifted. Questions followed. Careful ones. How did you get into it? Is it risky? Do you work alone? I answered politely. But I noticed something else too. My parents had gone quiet. Not offended, disoriented. The version of me they'd carried for decades, the frugal, unambitious, slightly embarrassing daughter, no longer fit, and they didn't know what to replace it with. Halfway through dessert, my mother leaned toward Claire. You know, she said loudly, she's always been secretive. We never really know what she's up to. I met her gaze. That's because you preferred the version of me that needed less explanation, I said. Claire blinked. Daniel inhaled sharply. My father snapped. That's not fair. Isn't it? I asked. You mock what you don't understand, and you never tried to. The table went quiet again. Not uncomfortable, honest.
Daniel broke it. I didn't know any of this, he said softly. Why didn't you ever tell me? I smiled at him. You never mocked me, I said. I just didn't want to put you in the middle. He nodded slowly. Later, as people mingled near the window, my mother cornered me. You embarrassed us, she hissed. I held her gaze steadily. You embarrassed yourselves, I replied. I just stopped covering for it. Her lips pressed thin. People are going to talk, she said. About the wine? I asked. Or about how little you knew your own daughter? She looked away. My father approached moments later. His voice was low. Are you really that successful? I studied him. Yes, I said, I am. He nodded once. Not proud, not apologetic, processing. The night ended with polite goodbyes. Claire hugged me tightly. Thank you, she whispered, for the wine and for being gracious. I smiled. Congratulations, truly. Daniel walked me out. I'm proud of you, he said, even if I don't understand all of it. That's okay, you don't need to. As I stepped into the night air, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. We need to talk, soon. I stared at it for a long moment, then slipped my phone into my bag without replying. Because the conversation she wanted, it wasn't about wine, it was about control. And the next time we spoke, I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. Because once people see you clearly, they can't unsee it. And the truth I'd just revealed, it was only the beginning. My mother didn't wait long. She never does when control slips through her fingers. She called the next morning at exactly 8:15, the time she's always believed sounds reasonable enough to avoid guilt, but early enough to assert dominance. I let it ring, not to punish her, to remind myself that I didn't have to jump. When I finally answered, her voice came out tight and clipped, already halfway into the conversation she'd been rehearsing. We need to clear the air, she said. Do we? I asked calmly.
Yes, she snapped. Last night was uncomfortable. For you, I said. For everyone, she corrected. You blindsided us. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, sunlight spilling across the floor in a way that felt almost symbolic. Quiet, clean, mine. I brought a gift, I said. You mocked it. That's not the point, she said sharply. The point is you let people think we didn't know our own daughter. I almost laughed. You didn't, I said. That wasn't new information. Silence crackled through the line. You've always been dramatic, she said finally. You could have told us what you were doing. You liked keeping secrets. I closed my eyes. I didn't keep secrets, I replied. I stopped offering information to people who used it as ammunition. She inhaled sharply. You make it sound like we were cruel, she said. You were dismissive, I replied. For years. That's not cruelty, she snapped. Maybe not to you, I said. It was to me. She didn't answer right away. Then she shifted tactics. Well, she said coolly, people are asking questions now. I smiled faintly. About the wine? About you, she said. They're surprised. Are you? I asked. Another pause. Yes, she admitted. I didn't know you had that kind of money. There it is, I said softly. What? That's what this is about. Not how you spoke to me, not how you treated me. You're upset because I broke the image you had of me. That's not fair, she said, but her voice wavered. Isn't it? I asked. She sighed, frustration bleeding through. You always wanted to be different. I just didn't think. You didn't think I could be successful, I finished. Say it. She didn't deny it. That's not what matters, she said instead. What matters is how this reflects on us. There it was. I felt something settle in my chest. Calm. Clarity. This doesn't reflect on you, I said. It reflects on me, and that's the part you're struggling with. Her voice hardened. You think you're better than us now? No, I replied. I think I'm done shrinking. She scoffed. You didn't have to humiliate us in public. I straightened. You humiliated yourselves. I didn't say a word until you did. She went quiet. Then came the line I'd heard my whole life. You've changed. I smiled. Yes, I said. I have. We hung up without resolution. I didn't feel rattled. I felt finished. Later that afternoon, Daniel came by unannounced. He looked uneasy, hands shoved into his jacket pockets like he wasn't sure where to put himself. Claire wanted me to check on you, he said. I'm fine, I replied. I know, he said. Mom and Dad are spiraling. I poured us coffee. Because they don't recognize me, I said. Because they didn't know you, he corrected gently. That mattered. They feel exposed, he added. They should, I replied. They built their comfort on underestimating me. He nodded slowly. Dad said something last night, he said, after you left. I looked at him. He said, I thought she needed us. I laughed quietly. I never needed them, I said. I needed them to stop dismissing me. Daniel sighed. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize, I replied. You weren't the one mocking me. He hesitated. Mom's convinced you did it on purpose, the wine, the reveal. I smiled. I didn't bring it to prove anything, I said, but I didn't stop the truth either. That's what scares her, he said. That the truth exists without her permission? I asked. He smiled faintly. Yeah. The fallout didn't stop there. Over the next week, messages trickled in. An aunt who suddenly wanted to catch up, a cousin asking vague questions about investments, a family friend who'd always treated me politely, now treating me carefully. I answered none of the probing questions. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, but my parents didn't stop trying. My father showed up at my door one evening, no warning, just standing there, hands clasped, eyes guarded. I wanted to talk, he said. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat stiffly at my kitchen table, looking around like the space itself challenged his assumptions. This place is nice, he said. It's home, I replied. He cleared his throat. Your mother's upset, he said. I know. She feels like you made her look foolish. I met his gaze. She did that herself. He frowned. You don't have to be so cold. I'm not being cold, I said. I'm being honest. He sighed, rubbing his temples. You could have told us you were doing well, he said again. And what would have changed? I asked. You would have bragged to your friends while still mocking my choices? That's not true, he protested weakly. Isn't it? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he tried something else. You've always been sensitive, he said. You take things personally. I leaned forward. "You mocked my gift," I said, publicly, at my brother's engagement. He looked away. "That was just teasing." "No," I replied, "it was dismissal, and I'm done accepting it as humor." He exhaled slowly. "You think money changes things," he said. "No," I replied, "it reveals them." He stood up abruptly. "I don't recognize you," he said. I smiled gently. "That's because you never looked." He left shortly after. That night, I sat alone with a glass of wine. Not the expensive one, just something simple, and I thought about the strange thing that happens when people finally see you clearly. Some grow curious, some grow proud, some grow resentful. My parents fell into the last category, because the truth wasn't just that I'd brought a $15,000 bottle of wine, it was that I'd built a life they didn't authorize, and they didn't know how to live with that. But the real consequence? It wasn't their embarrassment, it was the shift in power. Because once you stop being underestimated, people can no longer control you with mockery. And the next time my parents tried to put me back in the box they'd made, I was ready. Because the wine wasn't the most valuable thing I'd brought that night. It was my silence, and I wasn't giving it away anymore. The silence that followed my father's visit was louder than any argument we'd ever had. For once, no one rushed to fill it. No apology texts, no "let's all calm down" calls, no attempts to smooth things over with forced normalcy. Just distance. And distance, I was learning, is often the first honest response when a long-standing illusion collapses. 2 weeks passed. Then my mother invited me to lunch. Not dinner, not coffee. Lunch. Neutral territory, public enough to discourage a scene. I agreed. Not because I owed her, because I wanted to see who she'd be when the audience wasn't family. She chose a restaurant she liked to brag about. Linen napkins, minimalist plates, prices that made her feel discerning. I arrived on time. She was already seated, posture stiff, handbag placed just so, like armor. "You look well," she said, scanning me the way she always had, checking for something to critique. "Thank you," I replied. "So do you." We ordered. She didn't waste time. "I've been thinking," she said, folding her napkin with unnecessary precision, "about what you said." I waited. "You made us feel irrelevant," she continued. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked, "How?" "You didn't need us," she said plainly. "You never did." I tilted my head slightly. "That's what upset you?" "Yes," she said. "Parents are supposed to be needed." "No," I replied. "Parents are supposed to be supportive." She frowned. "You make it sound transactional." "You made it conditional," I said gently. The waiter arrived, set down bread, left again. She exhaled sharply. "You enjoyed that night," she accused. I met her eyes. "I enjoyed not being mocked," I said. "That's different." Her lips pressed thin. "People still talk," she said, "about the wine." "Do they talk about why you mocked it?" I asked. She looked away. "That's not what they focus on," she said. "They focus on you." "Good," I replied. "That's where the focus should have been all along." She shook her head. "You always wanted to stand apart." "No," I said. "I wanted to stand without being pushed." She stared at me, clearly trying to reconcile the daughter she thought she raised with the woman sitting across from her. "You embarrassed us," she said again, quieter this time. "I revealed myself," I replied. "You're embarrassed because it exposed how little you knew." The food arrived. She didn't touch hers. "I feel like I lost something," she said suddenly. I softened, just a little. "What do you feel like you lost?" I asked. "The version of you I understood," she admitted. I nodded. "I lost that version too, years ago. I just didn't mourn it out loud." She swallowed. "And now?" she asked. Now, I said, you get to decide whether you want to know me or continue mourning someone who never really existed. She stared at her plate. The lunch ended politely, not warmly, but without hostility. That alone felt like progress. Later that week, Daniel called. "Mom's struggling," he said. "I know," I replied. "She feels replaced," he continued. "By what?" I asked. "By your independence," he said. I smiled sadly. "She's confusing influence with relevance," I said. He was quiet. "You're not wrong," he said finally. Then came the family dinner, the one my parents insisted would reset things. I almost declined, but Claire encouraged me to go. "Sometimes," she said gently, "people need to sit with discomfort long enough to learn from it." So I went. The atmosphere was tense but controlled. No jokes at my expense, no commentary on my clothes, no thinly veiled digs. Instead, something else happened. They listened. When I spoke, no one interrupted. When I disagreed, no one mocked. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. At one point, my father asked, "How did you know the wine would be worth that much?" The old me would have downplayed it, deflected, changed the subject. The new me answered plainly. "I did the research," I said. "I trusted my judgment." He nodded slowly. "That takes confidence," he said. "Yes," I replied, "it does." He didn't argue. That night, as I drove home, I realized something important. They weren't suddenly proud. They were cautious, because confidence unsettles people who benefit from your doubt. But the real shift came days later. My mother called again. This time, her voice was quieter. "I ran into Margaret," she said. Margaret was one of her closest friends. "She asked about you," my mother continued. "About what you do." "And?" I asked. "I didn't know what to say," she admitted. "I realized I've been introducing you wrong for years." I closed my eyes. "How?" I asked. "As uncomplicated," she said. That word. "So small," she added, almost to herself. I let the silence sit. "I don't want to do that anymore," she said finally. I didn't rush to comfort her. "I'm glad," I said, "because I don't want to live inside that version anymore." She sighed. "I don't know how to talk about you," she admitted. I smiled. "You don't have to explain me," I said. "Just don't minimize me." She agreed. The real consequence of that night wasn't the shock. It wasn't the embarrassment. It was that my parents were finally confronting something they'd avoided my entire life. They had underestimated me because it was comfortable, and comfort, once disturbed, demands reckoning. But the story wasn't finished yet, because the last test, the one that would decide whether this change was temporary or real, was still coming, and it would force my parents to choose between the image they'd built and the daughter standing right in front of them. The test came quietly, not with another public event, not with an audience, not with wine or money or mockery. It came with a phone call my mother didn't expect to make. I was in my office sorting through paperwork when her name appeared on my screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, not out of avoidance, but because I'd learned not to rush anymore. I answered anyway. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was different, not defensive, not clipped, uncertain. "I need your advice," she said. I sat back in my chair. "You want my advice?" I asked gently. "Yes," she said. "I do." That single sentence carried more weight than any apology she'd ever almost given. "What's going on?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "One of my friends asked about investing. Wine, actually. She mentioned your name." I smiled faintly. "And?" "And I didn't know what to say," she admitted. I almost dismissed it, like I used to. I waited. "But then I stopped," she continued, "and I realized that habit doesn't serve me anymore." There it was. The reckoning. She wanted to know if you'd be willing to talk to her, my mother said carefully. Not as a favor, professionally. I felt something shift inside me. Not pride, permission. Yes, I said. I would. She hesitated. You don't have to. I know, I replied. That's why I'm saying yes. The call ended quietly. No celebration, no grand moment, but when I hung up, I stared at the wall for a long time, because that was it, the final confirmation. My parents weren't just reacting anymore, they were adjusting. A week later, my father invited me to dinner, just me. No audience, no mediator. I accepted. He cooked, poorly, but earnestly. We sat at the table where I'd once been mocked for being practical and economical and too quiet to matter. I owe you something, he said finally. I didn't interrupt. I used to think success looked one way, loud, visible, impressive to others. I nodded. And when you didn't chase that, he said, I assumed you were settling. I met his eyes. I wasn't, I said. I know, he replied. Now. He paused. I also know, he added, that I used humor to keep you small. It was easier than admitting I didn't understand you. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. I don't need you to understand me. I need you to respect me. He nodded. I do. And for the first time, it didn't feel like lip service. Weeks passed, then months. The shift held, not perfectly, but consistently. My parents stopped making jokes at my expense, stopped introducing me as the quiet one, stopped acting surprised when I spoke with confidence. Instead, something else happened. They listened. At a family gathering months later, someone asked what I did. Before I could answer, my mother spoke. She manages alternative investments, she said calmly. She's very good at it. No minimizing, no qualifiers, no disbelief, just truth. I caught my brother watching me from across the room, smiling. Later, he pulled me aside. They finally see you, he said. I smiled. They've finally stopped looking away, I replied. The wine from that night was never finished, not because it wasn't enjoyed, but because it became something else, a symbol, not of wealth, of revelation. My parents never mocked my gifts again, but more importantly, they never mocked my restraint, my quiet, my independence. They learned something uncomfortable, that the child they underestimated had built a life that didn't need their approval, and that realization, it changed the power dynamic forever. I didn't gain control, I released it, and that made all the difference. If you're still here, thank you for staying with a story that wasn't about revenge, but about dignity. Because sometimes the most powerful moment isn't when you prove your worth, it's when people realize you never needed to. And that night, with a bottle of wine they thought was forgettable, my parents finally understood who I was, not because I told them, but because I stopped hiding.